How did something called DNA come to be discovered? In an ant, a whale, and a human, variations of the same molecular alphabet. When you first hear that, you pause for a moment. It sounds poetic, almost like a metaphor. But it isn't. It's real. Every living being on Earth, without exception, carries a code written in the same 4 chemical letters: G, T, C, and A. Guanine, thymine, cytosine, and adenine. The 4 bases of DNA. These bases combine in triplets, and each triplet determines which protein will be produced. Altogether, these combinations create 64 possible codons, which in turn code for only 20 amino acids. Life, then, seems to have learned how to write countless words with a very limited alphabet. A beautiful reflection of biology's compact but creative nature. And this system is universal. It's the same in bacteria as it is in humans. There are a few exceptions. For example, some mitochondria use slightly different coding rules, but they don't change the bigger picture. This language is fixed across life. That's why it isn't surprising that we share about a third of our DNA with a tomato. We are simply 2 different versions of the same universal software. But here's the real question. Why these 4 letters? Or rather, why did life stay with just these 4? Chemistry could have offered more options, theoretically many more. Life could have evolved using different nucleotide systems, but evolution chose these 4 and never broke the rule again. No organism ever tried an alternative alphabet. Was that out of necessity, or just the persistence of one path among billions of possibilities? Let's chase that question for a bit. Because these 4 letters are not only a biological mystery, but also a philosophical one about probability, order, and meaning. If life is a story constantly being rewritten, then why does its alphabet stay fixed at 4? Well, maybe it doesn't have to. In fact, we now know, not just theoretically, but experimentally, that life can be written with other letters. Over the last 2 decades, scientists have created synthetic genetic systems that don't exist in nature, but behave like DNA. They're called XNA, xenonucleic acids, or alien nucleic acids. So what exactly are XNAs? They do the same job as DNA, carrying information, copying themselves, and even in some cases, acting like enzymes that catalyze biochemical reactions. But their internal structure is different. Instead of the usual AT and CG pairings, they use entirely new base pairs and backbones. For example, HNA uses a sugar called hexatol instead of ribose, making it more flexible. TNA relies on a simpler sugar called threose, which could have been more likely under early Earth conditions. PNA, on the other hand, replaces DNA's sugar phosphate backbone with a peptide-based structure, non-biological, yet still functional. So in the lab, scientists can now build new forms of DNA from completely different chemical architectures that still perform the same job. The most striking example came in 2019, when a NASA-backed research team added 4 entirely new bases, Z, P, S, and B, to the standard A, T, C, and G. They called it Hachimoji DNA, meaning 8 letters in Japanese. This synthetic DNA can form stable double helixes, copy information, and potentially serve as the foundation for living systems. In other words, life, as a concept, isn't bound to our version of chemistry. DNA isn't the only way life can exist. It's just our way. This 4-letter system survived because it worked, but that doesn't mean other alphabets can't exist elsewhere. Maybe they still do, on Europa, beneath its icy oceans, or in Titan's methane lakes, where the building blocks of life might use silicon or nitrogen instead of carbon. What we call life might not be a universal rule at all, just one outcome among countless cosmic experiments. DNA didn't win because it was special, it's here because it succeeded. But let's step back one more time. Where did these letters adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine come from in the first place? Because for life to use them, they had to exist before life began. That takes us to a time before biology, to a world where chemistry was still experimenting on its own, the prebiotic Earth. Here, the work of John Sutherland becomes crucial. Since 2019, his experiments have shown that with just a few simple ingredients, water, phosphate, hydrogen cyanide, and ultraviolet light, the precursors of DNA and RNA bases can form spontaneously, without any living systems involved. Only heat, light, and the right sequence of reactions, conditions that were common on early Earth, with its UV radiation, lightning storms, and geothermal energy. The most fascinating part, instead of designing complex separate pathways for each base, Sutherland's team discovered one unified route, a single environment where all four bases could emerge together. So these letters weren't miracles. They were chemically plausible, environmentally realistic, evolutionarily consistent. Other hypotheses also exist: volcanic ponds with wet-dry cycles, deep-sea hydrothermal vents, even meteorites delivering organic molecules from space. So while the full story isn't solved, one thing is clear: their appearance was not a miracle, just chemistry at work. They appeared because they could, and once they did, life began to walk the path they opened. Oh, and let's not forget, before DNA, there was RNA. For a while, RNA did it all. It stored information and replicated itself. It could even catalyze reactions. It was both the book and the printing press. Even today, some viruses survive purely on RNA, a clue that this system once worked perfectly on its own. Many scientists believe that life began in what's called the RNA world, and that DNA came later, more stable, more permanent, a natural upgrade. When you zoom out, the process sounds purely statistical. Molecules colliding, bonds forming and breaking, energy flows, endless repetition across time. Given enough chances, those four letters would eventually appear. In fact, by the laws of large numbers, they had to, because the universe never stops experimenting. Every second, everywhere. But even if we can explain it with probability, that doesn't erase the feeling it gives us. Because we humans don't live only by logic. We live by meaning, intuition, wonder. And no matter how scientific the explanation, the idea that all life, every song, every heartbeat, every thought, comes from four tiny molecules aligned in just the right order is still astonishing. It's not just a formula. It's the first line of a poem. Because if those molecules hadn't joined that day, this sentence wouldn't exist. This voice wouldn't reach you, and this thought would never have been born.